Welcome to this episode of the Smart Leaders Sell podcast. I'm Jessica Lorimer, sales coach and leadership expert, and I am really excited to dig down into today's episode. Hey poddies, it's Monday and I am excited. I have just literally done two things that make me very, very happy, which is always an exciting place to be on a Monday morning. So the first thing that has made me incredibly happy is that I am coming to New York. I just got my visa approved. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Very, very excited about this. I'm going to be in New York from the 28th of April to the 2nd of May. So if you have any ideas for tourist attractions I may not yet have seen, please feel free to drop me an email or hit me up on Instagram and tell me exactly where I should be going. I'm going over to meet up with one of my good friends, Tara Newman, who I've actually been biz besties with since 2015. And it's the first time we're going to meet in person. I'm very excited about this. So if you also have biz besties across the pond, or any pond in general, not just the Atlantic, then you should be meeting up with them this year. It's a good year for actually going and seeing real human beings. And I'm very, very excited, even though it's taken me 4 years to actually get across to see Tara. I'm really, really excited about it. We're going to have a whole weekend where we are complete tourists. She is a Manhattan native, so she's going to show me around. And I am just going to be, the complete tourist with a pretzel in my hand, wearing one of those shirts that says, I went to New York and all I got was this crappy t-shirt. And potentially one of those hats with like the Empire State Building on or something. I don't know yet. I'm going to work on the outfit choices, but very, very excited to have booked some tickets over there. And obviously, if you are in NYC and you're thinking that you might like to do an in-person intensive with me, now is the time to get in touch. I will be over there and can happily extend my stay in New York to run a couple of in-person intensives there. So if you are listening and thinking, yes, I would love to do that, then let me know. Drop me an email, jessica@jessicalorimer.com. I'm also really excited because we're in March. It's a brand new month and I am getting to spend an entire in-person day with my masterminders at the end of this month. On March the 25th, I'll be in London with my mastermind, having an epic day of hot seating and ideas exchanging. And it's going to be a great way to round out the first quarter of the year with them and celebrate some amazing wins, track out some plans for the rest of 2020. And what I love about the in-person days with my mastermind is that it's so powerful to bring people together on a regular basis, particularly when you're part of a high-level mastermind where you are consistently exchanging ideas, getting support, getting validation. And actually, when you're in person with these people, when you see them, once a month or whatever, and inside Facebook groups virtually, and you're all so supportive, that's really cool. But when you actually get to see people face to face, it's an awesome, awesome experience. I'm really, really excited to bring those guys together. It's going to be a really, really nice way to spend the day. And I've got a VIP day as well at the end of March, which I'm really looking forward to. So March, as it goes, is going to be a lot of in-person time with me, which I'm looking forward to. Really, really excited about. So if you are having a little bit of a dreary start to a March Monday, think about the things that you're going to be doing this month. Hit me up on Instagram, on email, tell me. What are the good things that you're focusing on for March? What are you doing that you are genuinely excited about? And I will be there to cheers you and virtually celebrate. Now, today's episode is an interesting one for me. It's all about resilience, and I'm not going to be doing this from a mindset perspective because we all know that I'm not the queen of mindset by a long way. But one of the things I see most often in the online space is people really talking about resilience and actually not lacking it, because I think that's a really negative way to look at it. But I think that people talk a lot about resilience, believe that they honestly believe that they are resilient, and then things happen that throw their resilience out of whack. And when you are the chief salesperson for your business, you can't really afford to go through these periods where you're not resilient, because it leaves you open and vulnerable to lots of things happening that you might take really, really negatively, or not be able to respond back to in the right way, or it might take you a while to bounce back, and that leaves your business at a bit of a loose end. So I want to talk about resilience today, and how actually exercising your resilience muscle can generate you more revenue, but also some of the other positive impacts that it can have on your life as well. So let's dive in. I'm just laughing to myself because I'm talking about this, and also I've just drunk an awful lot of water. So I'm at that kind of awkward stage where I still feel a little like I'm choking. Don't worry, I will try not to choke throughout the episode. Anyway, let's dive in and talk about what resilience really is. Well, resilience, as defined by the dictionary, is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, or the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, elasticity. For me, that's really interesting, because when we think about what resilience is, so this idea that resilience gives us that capacity to recover quickly from difficulty, or that it gives us the ability to spring back into shape. When we think about what it means to be resilient, often people get the two a little bit mixed up. So people can start to think that, oh, well, resilience is just keep going in the face of adversity and, just keep pushing. And that's not what it means to be resilient. What it means to be resilient is knowing how you will cope in spite of negative situations happening, in spite of barriers, in spite of challenges. So, according to the Speaker's Office, actually resilience is a measure of how much you want something and how much you are willing and able to overcome obstacles to get it. And it's actually to do with your emotional strength. Now, I always find that it's quite helpful to define things when we're talking on the podcast, because often, people's definition of certain words or emotional concepts, they change and they vary, as they naturally will do. But what I'm talking about today is this idea that resilience is about emotional strength. It's about understanding that you really want to achieve a goal, and that you're willing to do that even though you might experience obstacles or challenges or setbacks along the way, and how you're going to deal with those things. So resilience is a skill that salespeople learn or are taught from a very relatively early period in their career. I remember one of my mentors saying to me, you're going to get a lot more no's than you'll ever get yeses. So just don't worry about it. And for me, it made a lot of sense. It was a great piece of advice, and I didn't overthink it too much. I just figured, well, if it's so normal to get no's all the time, then when I get a no, it's not really a big deal. And I found that made me a lot more relaxed about my sales processes. I was a lot more detached from the outcome. Even when I was working in corporate, we had hugely high targets, and every time you achieved something, they would just set your target higher next time, instead of being like, oh wow, that's really cool. They're just like, cool, well, do more. And you would be under this phenomenal amount of pressure, but the reality was that I just played it like a game, like Monopoly. Sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. Either way, it's all good. The difference between selling in corporate and then running my own business, well, that was stark, frankly. Suddenly it mattered if I didn't get a sale, because if I didn't get a sale, that could be the difference between me paying my mortgage and not paying my mortgage that month. It could be the difference between buying one ply toilet roll, and believe me, that is not not a fun experience for anyone, and buying Andrex, right? And it sounds really silly, but it's true. And that's the position that you're in as a business owner. Suddenly you are attached to the outcome. You are attached naturally to the sale, because it makes a difference to your life. And ultimately, when you become a business owner, you take ultimate responsibility for yourself, your financial situation, for your emotional state, everything. Everything falls on you. And that's a really big responsibility. There are no other jobs in the world that mean you need to have that level of personal responsibility. And I think that's why entrepreneurship is so hard. It's not just about make a success of the business. It's not just about be a great parent when the time, comes in the evening when you see your kids or whatever. It's about that huge personal decision and personal responsibility that you might face. Decision fatigue is a very real thing. Having to bounce back from rejection is a very real thing. But when you're doing it all day, every day, that can feel like not necessarily a challenge, but it just feels like this huge mountain to climb. And so when we're talking about resilience being a key skill that salespeople need to learn, it's also a key skill that you need to have as a business owner. You must be able to bounce back. You must be able to accept that not every single situation or sales process is going to go your way, and that's fine. Sometimes you will win, sometimes you will lose. Either way, it's all going to be all right. Now, throughout the course of this episode, I'm going to share a couple of my top tips. This is what I do to stay resilient, to exercise that resilience muscle. But you might have other coping strategies or mechanisms that you use. And if you get to the end of this episode and you think, okay, perhaps I'm not as resilient as I need to be, that's fine too. You can go and seek support. You can go depending on whether you want personal or professional resilience, you can go to therapy, you can look at mindset coaching, or you can simply do more of the activities that scare you and start training yourself into building that resilience muscle, just like you would if you were going to go to the gym, right? You don't get biceps if you don't do any lifts. You can tell that I'm not concentrating on my biceps ever. I'm like, I have no idea what you do to get biceps. So let's have a little look at this. Let's start with the phrase, if you don't ask, you don't get. Who has ever heard this? I used to get told this a lot as a kid. If you don't ask, you don't get. Go to the library, ask if they've got that book that you really want. Ask that kid over there if they'll play with you. I used to get that a lot because, the whole only child thing. People really worry that only children will grow up with no social skills. I mean, they're not necessarily wrong. Look at me, I'm a hermit. But I used to get it all the time. They'd be like, well, if you don't ask that kid over there if you can play on the slide, then you're probably not going to be able to. And it seems like we teach children this. We teach them to be bold. We teach them to take up space. We teach them to ask for help and support. And yet, as we grow into adulthood, apparently that stuff should either no longer be relevant, like we shouldn't need support, we should know it all as soon as we hit 21, or it's considered being a burden. Yeah. Oh, you take up space in my inbox. You ask me to do things. You want help. You want assistance. Ugh, what a burden you are. That's how it feels in our heads. And it almost diminishes the resilience that we build up as children. And, it's interesting. It's always interesting to me. I think you can learn a lot from children. Despite not wanting any, I can see that kids teach you quite a lot of things. And I think that the two biggest things that children teach you, one is resilience. They will keep on asking. They will bounce back from rejection. If you tell them no once, they'll ask you 50,000 more times until you eventually say yes, or, I don't know, put them on the naughty step. The second thing is tolerance. Kids are incredibly tolerant. They are tolerant of, and I think we have to preface this with tolerant and curious. They're tolerant of different races, they're tolerant of different religions, different sexualities. They ask questions, right? And they learn. I think those are valuable skills as adults that we give up. We forget that if we ask once, we might get an answer we don't like, so we never ask again. And we assume that that's then the programming for how everything is going to be. Oh, if I ask for the sale, someone called me sleazy, well, now everyone else is going to think so. We forget to be tolerant and interested and curious in people. Oh, somebody's decided to run their business that way. I wonder why. Let me ask. And instead, we can kind of make these snap judgments, or we decide that we are defined by an answer that somebody else has given us. And so actually, when it comes to building your resilience muscle and generating more revenue, it really does come down to this idea that if you don't ask, you don't get. If you don't put the sale out there, nobody will ever buy it, right? If you don't give them the opportunity, how can they? It's not about waiting for people to ask you all the time. And people often say this to me. They're like, oh, but Jess, you must get emails every single day from people asking how they can buy from you. Well, some days, yeah. I mean, if you're looking at like a Wednesday or a Thursday, those are probably the good days of the week. But I always feel quite cynical about this. People assume that I might get, people emailing me and saying, oh, how can I buy from you? And that it must be so easy. It's not. Yes, sometimes people do ask me, how can I buy this? Or how could you help me? And I might spend a good, 25 minutes explaining something to somebody and explaining why they should buy something, or, what they can do or how they can do it. And you know what? They might not buy. They might have got to that point where they've actually asked me and they want to know how it's done, but they don't want to do the actual purchasing. They just wanted to maybe validate their question or find out whether it was the right fit for them, or, feel like in some cases they are moving towards doing something in their business. And that's okay, right? But it doesn't mean that I stop answering those questions. It doesn't mean that because one or two people might turn around and say, oh no, I've had a little think about this since I asked the question and I don't want to buy now, that I automatically assume that every single person who gets on a sales call with me or who sends me an email and asks what it would be like to purchase a program or how much something is, it doesn't mean that I assume every single person will do the same thing. We see it a lot online where people assume that because one person has done something, automatically everyone else will do. And I think that's quite sad. I think that is quite sad. And I actually think that it's one of the reasons that people have become very scared to sell. People often talk about sales being sleazy online. And, I don't see it all that often anymore. I really don't. And the reason is, as soon as anyone does it, everybody else is so on the bandwagon with, oh my goodness, I cannot believe that somebody dared come in my inbox today and invite me to buy something. Right? Nobody wants to do it anymore. Nobody, all the network marketers out there, I don't know about you guys, but I've not had any messages about like anything for months, because we're so quick to jump on it. The whole of social media is so quick to shame people. And look, I'm not saying anyone's wrong to do that. I get just as hacked off about people stealing my stuff or jumping into my inbox and, trying to sell me weight loss pills as anybody else. But the reality is that this has happened in a consistent way from, ever since I've been online, since 2015. We've seen these shady, slimy, sleazy sales tactics, and people keep talking about them, but I don't see them as often anymore. What I do see is a generation of business owners who are afraid to get called out on social media, who are afraid to do things like proactive outreach, because they're afraid that somebody might turn around and say, oh, well, that's really sleazy, so I'm going to shout about you on social media and destroy your confidence. Right? I think it's a shame. I think it's in some ways good. We see less of the sleazy tactics. In some ways, though, it's contributing to a real lack of resilience or a real lack of confidence in the online space. People don't want to do basic sales tasks anymore because they're so afraid of what might happen. Somebody might think it was gross. Somebody might get offended by it. Somebody might talk about it on social media. Somebody might copy your idea. And so we don't do anymore. And if we want to generate revenue, we have to develop this if I don't ask, I don't get mentality. But we also have to develop our if I don't do, nothing will happen mentality as well. That's really important. If I don't do, nothing will happen. It's interesting to me because during sales processes, people often say to me, how can you prove that I will get results? Well, I can't and I won't. And anyone who tells you that they can, liar. Like, it's just an immediate red flag. You can be supremely confident in your services. What you can never be supremely confident is the person buying them. You can't prove that they're going to do the work. You can't prove that they're going to show up every day. So all you can ever give somebody is a healthy estimate. If you do this, then it's likely you will experience that. What I always say to people is, how can I guarantee that you will do the work you say you're going to do? And that stumps people for a minute, because we don't often challenge our audience. We don't often challenge our audience on sales calls. We don't often challenge them in communication. We don't often elevate the conversation enough for them to feel some of the negative emotions that actually you need to feel in order to change something. Think about it this way. Last year, I went on a health kick. I'll be very clear here. I'm talking about my own journey. I'm not talking about anybody else who's gone on a health kick. But I went on a health kick because I put on a few kilos and I was fed up of feeling overweight. I was fed up of not being fit enough. I was fed up of the way that I looked. I was fed up of the way that my clothes fit. And you know what? I got targeted with a bunch of adverts. Some of them were good, some of them were bad, that talked to my pain points and challenged my perception. You know, one of the things that I was to tell myself was, well, I don't have time. You know, I don't have time to go out for a walk every day because I've got to deal with my clients and I've got to be there for them and I've got to do X and Y. And there was one advert that actually challenged that time piece and said, you know, people often say that they don't have time to exercise when really they just don't want to prioritize. And that hit me right in the feels. I was like, oh, this is me. I'm just lazy. And that's okay. Like, I got to sit with that and be initially quite hacked off that someone dared to say to me that actually I did have time. I was just choosing not to. Of course, I get to be hacked off about that. What I also get to do is sit with that negative emotion and think, what do I want to do about this? Do I want to accept it as being true and change something so I feel better about my narrative? Or do I want to change this narrative completely and just ignore it and move on? And, you know, do nothing differently and be happy to continuously moan about how I feel. I chose the former. I decided that every day during the break that I set myself for lunch, I would go out walking every day. And every day I do 90 minutes, 4 to 5 miles. And, you know, sometimes I call my mum, sometimes I'm listening to music, sometimes I'm listening to podcasts, and I walk. And you know what? I've lost like 11 kilos. So clearly I needed to lose them, right? But had I not seen that advert, I don't know how long it would have taken me. Equally, there's an important lesson there to learn around challenging your audience and letting them own the narrative. I could have been upset. I could have been offended. In fact, I think on this particular advert, there are a bunch of people who were very offended in the comments, who gave lots and lots of reasons, valid and, you know, potentially invalid, as to why they couldn't make time, as to why it wasn't about them not prioritizing. It was that they genuinely did not have time. And you would be surprised at the amount of people out there who genuinely believe that they are spending 24 hours a day doing anything other than, you know, whatever it is that they actually apparently want. They got to be resentful. Other people got to change their own truth and got to get the results that they wanted. That's an empowering thing to do for your audience. It's not necessarily an empowering thing to do for you, right? If everyone sits there and says, oh, but you're awful because you sell things, or oh my goodness, you're awful because you pointed out that I'm not doing this thing in the way that I should be doing it, that eats away at your confidence. So actually it's really important, if you want to generate revenue, you keep going and you understand that this isn't personal. You cannot control other people's reactions to what you are putting out there. That's on them. That's on their narrative. That's on what they want to do. It's not about you. And again, that's something that in the online space is really hard, because everyone's out there all the time. They're giving value in Facebook groups. They're putting up posts all the time in their personal profile. They're, you know, out on YouTube. They're team one person 1 minute and team the other person the next. And all of these things, if you let them, they will build up and they start chipping away at how you feel about what you do, about how you feel about, the services you provide, about how they feel about, the way that you sell them. And they start diminishing your resilience. So what can we actually do, like from a practical perspective? What can we do to be more resilient? The first thing is to actually exercise your resilience muscle. Do things that people won't like more often. This is why I'm not a mindset coach, but seriously, this works, right? I have to, as a person who is genuinely very empathetic, I can get really sucked in to helping way above my boundaries, right? And so occasionally I have to do things, once a week or a couple of times a month that I know other people will not like. Because I have to remind myself that I'm developing resilience. And that might mean that, when my friends say, do you want to do this? I say, no, actually I don't. And I'm reminded when I do that, it's funny, they'll still like me anyway, even if I want to choose to be a hermit that weekend. It might be that I put out a really controversial piece of content for my audience, and I challenge myself to understand that their reaction is not about me. It's not to say that you go out and you intend to create content that plays with the emotions of your audience, but it's absolutely okay sometimes to just go out there with a more controversial opinion than you'd normally take, because you're developing resilience. It's also fine to do more proactive outreach, and, look for the no's. Go out there, go into more email inboxes, sell more. And you're going to get people who turn around and say no. And equally, you're going to get people that turn around and say yes. So exercising that resilience muscle on a practical level will really help you, A, develop it, and B, make more money. The second thing is to know how you want to deal with situations. People often worry that what will happen if. I'm one of those people. I worry about things to the nth degree. Sometimes I'll be worried oh, maybe my car should go in for a service. And before I know it, I've literally extrapolated from, I wonder if my car should go in for a service because I've noticed the oil level is a little bit low, to, oh my goodness, I will be driving along down the motorway at 95 miles an hour and suddenly my car will explode into this ball of flames and I will be dead and people will be upset and it will be awful, right? I'm very, very good at worrying to the nth degree about things. However, what I have learned as a result of being a salesperson is that you can only really worry about what you can control. And for me, the only thing that I can control is having a process to deal with things that I don't like that much. So for example, I can put out controversial pieces of content and, there's always going to be that voice in the back of my head that says, well, Jess, what if somebody doesn't like it? And I always think, okay, so what's most likely to happen? Step one, the person's probably going to contact me in some way, publicly or privately, to tell me they don't like it. What would be my step two in that process? Well, step two would not be to react immediately, because if I react immediately, it's probably going to be emotional and unhelpful. So step two, take a step back. Step three, respond in a polite way. How would I want to respond, or how would I want to come across in my response so that I can look like I'm credible, and so that I can look like I'm acknowledging somebody's opinion, but also sticking to my own point. Step four, forget about it. Don't dwell on it for hours. Don't think about it for days. Don't let it wind you up unnecessarily. And that's it. That's the process. You can develop your own process for every single situation. It doesn't have to be the same one. It can be different. You might think, oh, well, I don't want to do proactive outreach because somebody might copy my message or screenshot my message and put it all over the internet and say that I'm sleazy. Okay, what's step one going to be? Accept that now you've got some more publicity. Woohoo! Step two, respond, whether it's publicly or privately. How do you want that response to look? Step three, forget about it, move on. There'll always be the final step of forget about it and move on, because that's what resilience ultimately means. It means getting back to that baseline of before things went wrong, before you experienced the challenge or the setback. So you have to think about yourself as an elastic band. Effectively you're pinging back to normal. So what have you got to do in your process to help yourself ping back to normal? And that's it. Yeah. The other thing that we've got to look at with resilience and how we can become more resilient is to start thinking about the ways that we approach situations. If you approach every single sales situation in your business with, this is probably going to end negatively, guess what? It probably will. So if every piece of content you put out there, you're worried that it's going to look wrong or that somebody's going to get upset, and that stops you putting it out there, then you need to readjust your thought pattern. How can you make it easier for yourself? I personally like to listen to upbeat music. I do it every day. As soon as I get out of bed, I hop in the shower, not literally because that I hear is dangerous. But when I get out, I put on the most upbeat music I can find because it helps me settle into the day. And then even if things go wrong, I'm able to get back to that baseline of dancing around the kitchen and being like, yeah, today's going to be a good day. It can be so simple to become more resilient, but ultimately the only thing that's going to help you be more resilient is to practice it, to put yourself in more situations where you could experience rejection. It's not nice. Rejection isn't pleasant for anybody, but neither is living in total fear that you should never sell because you're worried of what people might think or what people might do. So you have to choose what you want more. And in the true definition of resilience, you measure how much you really want something. If you really want to become an influencer, or you really want to become a 6-figure or 7-figure business owner, and how much you are willing to do and the obstacles that you are willing to overcome in order to achieve it. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have, feel free to hop over onto iTunes, leave us a little review. Reviews are going well, by the way. Thank you so much to everybody who is leaving them. I really, really appreciate it. And it does massively help pop us up the iTunes charts. Next week, I've got something very exciting for you. The 9th of March, I am taking you behind the scenes of Big Business Empires with 2 of my friends and colleagues, Janet Marie and Lisa Johnson. We're having the first ever 3-way conversation on the Smart Leader Sell podcast. So make sure you tune in next Monday. It's going to be a good one. I'll see you then.